My name's Adam Scarborough, and I've been a lifelong civil liberties campaigner. I was in the British Army for 3 years. I went back for a short time in 1986 in 257 Kings Road, Army Medical Corps. My background, apart from being military, is also psychology and psychiatry. And I think that in any true democracy, you shouldn't need civil liberties groups like Big Brother Watch, which is one of the groups I support in Liberty, but unfortunately we do. But being drawn into the movement, it came out of nowhere in 2020, about May 2020, when I saw my friend Piers Corbyn knocked down by the police at Speaker's Corner. And I used to listen to a lot of Dr. John Lee, an epidemiologist, a virologist. You may remember him. He was on a show called Autopsy with Professor Gunther von Hergens, a guy who stuffs bodies. But I used to listen to a lot of him, and I heard the word psyop. And when he said that, psychological operations, I realized that we were up against the state. And I've got to admit, it was a little bit scary, and because I didn't know how we were going to respond. I mean, the nearest analogy I could think of was probably in the 1640s, when I wasn't around, when we were a dictatorship under Cromwell for 5 years. But I think even Cromwell was an idealist. The guys who joined the New Model Army, I would imagine, were didn't like royalty very, very much. And I think Cromwell was the closest thing we had to a revolutionary. But I realised we were up against the state, but the more demos I went to, I did see signs that we were winning. And when I heard a chief of police advising the so-called TSG, Territorial Support Group, who are basically a bunch of ignorant thugs who enjoy attacking defenceless people, he said this would have been April the 24th, 2021, when there must have been, I don't know if you're on that demo, about 1 million people, Tony, come from all directions, Park Lane, across from the Serpentine into Hyde Park. And the chief of police addressed the TSG saying, look, there's more of them than us here today. There are former soldiers here today, even if they're in groups of six, more than six, that ridiculous rule about being in groups of six at the time. Leave them alone. We don't want trouble. And in that day, we were prepared for the police. 2 weeks earlier, they brought in constabularies from all over the country, from Wales, from Scotland, and they were smashing everyone over the head. I can't stand the sound of screaming women, Tony, but they were surrounding. The police are basically like a group of lions that grab one buffalo and drag it in and get all the meat off it they can. But hearing screaming women, I've never been able to quite cope with that. And they surround the victim so you can't take photographs. And then put the boot in when you're not looking to stop you taking photographs.
What about your army service? What units were you in? What kind of part of the army?
Well, I was in the REME, Royal Electrical and Mechanical Engineers. We were a light attachment unit affiliated to 36th Eastern Signal Regiment, Catterick in North Yorkshire. So I did my recruits course in Catterick in North Yorkshire, and then went to Boreham in Kent, where the REME establishment was the head office, in 1982.
So did you do your basic training, which is supposed to be pretty rough and tough, isn't it?
It was pretty rough and tough, because in those days, I don't think it's like today, they sent you to a place called Sutton Coldfield, where it's like an aptitude test where they see if the army is going to accept you or whether you're going to accept the army. And I mean, to give you an idea, we had 1 or 2 guys there with us that had done time in detention centres, and they said the army was worse than the detention centre. I don't know if you've ever seen that film Scum, but it was like that. So the army recruitment course was worse than that. They kept us in for weeks, basically pouring crap over everywhere, making us clean it. Total futility, coming in and seeing if there's any dust on the place whatsoever. It was the whole idea of it, Tony, was to break you. And 1 or 2 people did leave the course and came home. And obviously they do it for psychological reasons. It's in wartime, it's hell, and the idea, we had 1 or 2 SAS guys with us on that course, Special Air Services, and one of them I remember telling me just hang on in there, and he was a nice guy. But I wasn't really army material. I mean, I think I'd be better now. I could have gone to the top. I could have got a commission because I qualified as a nurse later. I could have got a commission and gone to the top if I wanted to. But I just did the 3 years and I
But
came out and I did nurse training.
yeah, so did you do any? I mean, just give us a brief idea of your medical history too.
Okay, yeah, I started a nurse course in 1984, which is the RMN course, Registered Mental Nurse. It's a 3 year course, and it's quite a stiff course. You learn about mental illness. There's a difference between psychology and psychiatry. Psychology is a study of animal behaviour and human behaviour. Psychiatry is a study of mental illness. So I did the RMN course, a degree in that in 1984 to 87. So I qualified then, I had my graduation. And since then, I've worked in all sorts of psychiatric environments. I've done forensic, I've done care of the elderly, I've done British Army Military Trauma Unit, PTSD camp. I've done prison. I've done quite a few prisons over the years. I've done forensics units. So I've had a lot of experience in that. Seen quite a lot of violence over the years. I mean, I've worked in prisons. In prison, you either work in reception or you work on the mental health wing. So at 4 o'clock they come in. Basically, you check them in and you do risk assessment and all sorts of crazies. You know, sex offenders. Quite a few police admitted over the last 3 years. There's a couple on charges of tasering an old guy at the moment of 97 with one leg, and there's another cop whose name's gone public thanks to the judge who's on a murder charge for shooting a black guy in the head at point blank range. And I mean, in the British Army, we were taught to shoot in the head and in the heart, basically to make sure that there was nothing left, and basically to kill them outright. You don't want, having prisoners can drag you down a bit. But to shoot a civilian in the head, I think it shows their mentality. And he thought he could get away with it, but thankfully the judge saw differently. But his colleagues and the police did everything they could to try to keep his name from going public. But the judge released it, which means if he is convicted and he comes to jail, every con on the wing is going to know who he is, because police officers are the most at risk
Well,
prisoner
I mean,
in
they
prisons.
had this thing in Northern Ireland, didn't they, called shoot to kill, which was
Yeah,
very
yeah,
controversial at the time, but now it seems
yeah,
almost to be the norm. When we have
yeah,
terror attacks in other countries, like, for example, Slovakia, or
yeah.
in Russia, probably most parts of the world, actually, the idea is to keep the person alive so you can find out who they are and why they did what they did, which helps you investigate other people they were working with and that sort of thing. But over here, it seems
Mhm,
to me that
mhm.
the official policy is just to blow them away, so there's no trial.
Yeah,
Obviously, there may be an inquest, but that can be easily fixed. But anyway, look, I
yeah,
asked you
yeah,
on today, Adam, to talk about
yeah.
this rather extraordinary story that's been. Well, I mean, actually, it was last year, I believe, the first attack on these early warning radar nuclear missile defenses of the Russians. But we're now in the last week, we've had another two attacks by the Ukrainians. They say it's by drones. There's nothing's been specified about whether those drones have flown the 1,500 or so miles all the way from Ukraine, or whether maybe they were launched from somewhere nearer, maybe from some woods with a sort of covert unit launching them. But the fact of the matter is, we've now got three of these big air defense. I mean, we have them here in Britain. It's one of them's called, anyway, I know I've been past, called Fylingdales up in North Yorkshire. The idea is they're massive radar arrays that are pointed out towards the enemy to give you as much warning as possible if there is a launch of ballistic missiles in space that are nukes heading for your country, which gives you that whatever it is, 3 minute, 5 minute warning. But
Mhm.
these are really nothing whatsoever to do with the special military operation or the invasion of Ukraine, and it doesn't seem as if there's much of a connection. So can you just go into maybe what you have seen as happened there, and what the implications are? Because it seems to me this is a very underreported story.
Yeah, I mean, I did see the articles. You sent me quite lengthy articles, and obviously there are a number of early warning systems. Another one is it's actually it's used the psychology of the best form of attack his defense is the Patriot missile system that shoots them down. They've used those in Israel quite a lot, particularly when Saddam Hussein was sending Scud missiles into Israel. But these things are take it to another level, and it's my only guess is that they've been put there by Western interference, because we know that the Ukrainians have lost up to 1.5 million men. The carnage is unbelievable out there. I had a friend who's been doing security out there. He showed me piles of bodies of Ukrainian women, and this has been set there. You've got to remember, in all normal circumstances, this war would have been terminated for a while. And whatever this thing is, it's the likes of Boris Johnson. I mean, I wouldn't even call him an animal. I'd call him a creature that went out there to deliberately prolong war, the death and destruction of both Russians and Ukrainian soldiers. And that man can sleep well at night. I mean, I don't think he gets. I've interviewed a lot of prisoners over the years, but I don't think anyone comes as close to that man's psychopathy. But I digress. But the
Yeah,
actual
well, so what
nature
are
of
these
the
piles of bodies that ladies, women's bodies? What were they? How have they been killed?
he showed me basically, I think it's a result of probably Russian missile attacks, but in particular, they've segregated the men from the women, and the horrendous photographs of literally piles of bodies of women about to be buried, because that area, the area down in the south of Ukraine, the Donbass region, is now all under Russian control. And to take a line from, I think it's Napoleon, people should know when they're defeated, but it's only. I don't think we can really talk about this problem in the Ukraine without bringing in the World Economic Forum, because it has been those that have continued the war out there. And in my opinion, every war that they're bringing at the moment, the fear porn, whether it's in Palestine or in the Ukraine, is just really a smokescreen for this government, particularly ridiculously Sunak recently talking about bringing in national service. I mean, I don't, it's absurd. But I think most
Why
of
is it
this.
absurd? Some people say it's popular, actually.
Well, I mean, there was a play in the 70s. I forget the author. It was called "Chips with Everything," and it showed you the life of national service. I won't go into what, but the drill sergeant was very, very crude in his methods of. There was no Army Welfare Association like there is today, and you had like a bus driver or a dustman in with some Oxford graduate, and they were all thrown in together. And they weren't professional soldiers as we were. They weren't volunteers. They were literally put there and didn't like it very much. So my own feelings was I wouldn't be too happy being on the range, and particularly realizing the ethnic diversity in this country today, the people who I would say don't have particular 100% allegiance to this country. I wouldn't feel happy being on the range or being in a war situation with people who didn't really consider themselves to be British, or people whose loyalty to other countries would transcend their loyalty to this country.
Yeah,
And
and
I've
also
done
that
some work.
maybe that
Yeah,
didn't want to be there. The conscripts don't want to be there. But look, what about
no,
Ukraine? I mean, it should have ended. Many would say years ago, but the
yeah,
West has kept it going, and it
yeah,
now looks as if they're upping the ante with these targets in Russia. Adam, they are not
yeah.
targets of Zelensky. They are NATO targets, and the Russians well know that, don't they?
Yeah, I mean, from what I know about that, I mean, my ultimate, I was in the time of the Cold War. We learned a lot about Russian rocket launchers, and basically, the British Army was in Germany to protect the Rhine from the Warsaw Pact countries. This was 1982. It's slightly different today. The Russians, up until recently, the Russians were our allies, but yeah, this is being prolonged. It makes no sense at all. Even if you look at Napoleon's thoughts on the art of war and power, he said that there's no point in sacrificing the men, but they have literally sacrificed million, I think close to 1 million people in the Ukraine, and the people should know when they're defeated. And there's no point in escalating it. My opinion, to look at the other wars historically, we've been taken into. I mean, I've read some of Captain Wilfred Owen's poetry in World War One, devastation, and what was that all over? Archbishop Ferdinand in Serbia. I mean, 40,000 English dead in one morning. We should learn from history. We should not take this country into war unless it's going to benefit the people of this country.
No, I mean
It's
the
absolutely
Russians are
futility.
alleging, aren't they, that there's actually far more NATO, not just weapons, but also manpower in Ukraine. I wonder, what do you make of that?
Well, the manpower is there, but the Russians, from what I know, have got some extremely sophisticated weaponry. Boris Johnson sent, I think, 50, is it Saxton or Chieftain tanks out there, which were reduced to molten metal in a week. They destroyed them within a week. And the Russians know their area. I mean, the only real nation to defeat Russia over the centuries is really the British in the Crimean War with Lord Cardigan's forces. But things were differently then. It's always been the cold and that has driven driven Napoleon back, or driven the Wehrmacht, the German army back. So, from what I know, I think we should. I'm not saying Putin's a nice person. I don't know him personally, but from what I know down there, that most of them are Russian speaking. There were, from what I heard, Nazis down there, and Russian speaking people of Donbass had a hard time. And I think it was twofold. I think there was that, and also the fact that NATO wanted to continue its presence there, and Putin just didn't want that. And from what to quote the old phrase, poking the Russian bear, they're still doing it. And I hope, I mean, Russian, my only hope is that this doesn't gravitate towards using tactical nuclear weapons. I hope not, because but if you push a snake so far, if a snake's in an S formation and it's got nowhere to go, it will respond. And so I think they might be trying to push Vladimir Putin to the point where he does respond. Because let's not forget, as I say, you can't talk about this, Tony, I don't think, without mentioning Klaus Schwab's Great Reset. In the Great Reset, he talks about the dismantleization of society, and he means it. The more destruction they can cause, the better. And another million bodies to him, what's that much? I mean,
And what's the
my
point of
feeling.
that? What's the point of that?
Well, the point of it is it's lack of point, really. There is no logic in it at all, unless you're talking about mass destruction. And the objective of the Great Reset, the World Economic Forum, from what I understand, is to to make us have nothing, as he says, and be happy, which is quite the opposite. It wouldn't be that way, but to make us totally subservient to the state. But you only get what you can get from the state if you agree with their principles, which ties in with the digital ID, which would then go into the CBDCs, which I think we've got to stop that. And then you can only buy what they will want you to buy. You can only go where you want to go, because your money would no longer be your own. Your money would just be a
Okay,
figure.
well, look, let's
Yeah,
get back to Ukraine,
yeah,
because there's
yeah.
been discussion before the general election was called about whether or not there are British soldiers in there, and we've had various defence ministers saying, and secretaries and ministers basically saying, well, this is none of your business. Actually, Parliament is supposed to scrutinise this sort of thing, but there's a lot of suspicion of British boots on the ground in Ukraine. What do you have any evidence? Do you have any sources with anything to say
Well,
about that?
there are British boots, and I think also French boots as well. I mean, I think special forces are there, from what I know. I don't have absolute proof of that, but I do know that they are there. They're there from I know that. And they are, from what I know, and according to Andrew Bridgen, we're in a war with Russia, a proxy war, shall we say. We've never voted for war like anything else in the last 4 years. None of it's done with the consent of our people. But from what I hear, they were going to make it. From what Andrew Bridgen said, speaking to the Russian diplomat Dmitry, whatever his name is, that they were going to make it official sometime in July that we are at war with Russia. It will be a very, very quick war, because we don't have an army these days. We don't have in the Falklands in 1982, we commandeered the QE2 to take 2,000 troops down to the South Atlantic. We couldn't even do that today. So these people are insane. These people are totally, utterly insane.
Well,
And
I
I'm
mean, it's
sure.
amazing, isn't it? We've got the D-Day celebrations coming up, but
Yeah,
apparently the 50th anniversary, but apparently no,
yeah,
80th anniversary, but apparently they don't have the aircraft to do a fly past. They're using them for other things, so they don't have anything
yeah,
spare. Now,
yeah.
the other side of all of this is, if there is an undeclared war, you're saying you think that they may soon actually make it open. It doesn't. I don't
Yeah.
understand how you can be at war with a country without actually making it public. It seems a very sneaky thing to do.
Well, it's like everything else this government does, this WEF-led government, and I'm sorry, I'm going to bring the WEF into it again. Everything is done underhand. Everything is done clandestine without any consent whatsoever. The CBCs, and it's done so without fear, without thinking about the long-term consequences for us. And we know the way the behavioural insights team has released fear on us over the last few, the fear porn, the behavioural insights team and the nudge unit, which became the behavioural insights team, and taking this into war would literally it'd be equivalent, I think, to when they played over the airwaves some years ago, HG's Worlds, or was it War of the Worlds, and they terrified everyone. We would actually be at war. And I think you would see a neurotic response. But I mean, I've seen war. I've seen Southampton Dock in 1982 with guys coming back with legs off and amps, screaming, moaning. That never leaves you. But most of these people who push for national service won't go themselves. It will always be Tommy Atkins or the working class that have to go and do the dirty work for big pharma, and for the aristocracy. They won't go. I mean, I knew Prince Andrew was down in the Falklands War. From what I heard, he did a bit of land mining down there, but on the beaches. But I digress. But this war in Ukraine has no intrinsic benefits to the UK. We should adopt a policy of non-interference, and hopefully Donald Trump can get elected. And he did some great work by meeting Kim Jong Un, and form peace between North and South Korea. That's proper diplomacy. Anything else other than to take us into war is insanity, absolute insanity, because we would lose. We do not have the hardware. It would be over in a matter of days, to be quite honest. And the British people, as you say, they're not prepared for war. What benefits are there for us? It's not
Okay,
like,
so let's
yeah.
imagine that it's now July, and the new government, Keir Starmer, almost certainly will announce. Actually, sorry, folks, but we are at war with Russia. What's going to happen? How you say you think it's going to be a short war, but I mean, most of the wars of these people that have been in charge the last 30 or 40 years seem to go on forever.
But yeah, I mean, my only hope is, I mean, Starmer is a sort of personality. You've only got to look at him if you talk about psychology and personality profiles. Very stony-faced individual. When he's under pressure, he doesn't respond. He's very, very cold individual, and very, very, shall we say, single-minded. When I've seen him, I know there's a lot of animosity in the Labour Party at the moment, and when he's been questioned by disgruntled members of the Labour Party, he's just stood there. So he's the sort of person who would go into war without any fear whatsoever. It's just his personality. He's quite a terrifying individual, I think, and I don't think he's going to go down too well. They may vote for him just to get rid of Sunak, but someone with that personality doesn't have, and it's a fictitious personality. Boris Johnson's circus animal personality, bubbly, jovial, that attracted the British to vote for Johnson. I mean, he's an absolute psychopath. He's basically a psychopath disguised as a clown. Johnson. I've seen it in Psychopaths before. But with Starmer, he's a stony-faced individual, and he's one will take us into war without fear of consequence. My only hope is that Vladimir Putin has the humility to realise that it's not an attack from the British people. We did not vote from this war, and that if he does attack anyone, it will be those that want to take us
So,
into
I
war,
mean,
and it won't
is it
be.
feasible for a war to take place, which is really just attacking military targets, military bases, places like Portsmouth, maybe Catterick or Fylingdales, without involving the British people? Surely, I mean, the whole point is going to be to guilt trip the leadership by threatening and possibly wiping out large slices of the population.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think the last time our land, the UKR was actually under attack was probably the Norman Conquest, to be quite honest. And it didn't have Scud missiles in those days. I wasn't around, but yeah, I mean, he could take them out. They could take them out
Well,
quite
hang on. What
easily.
about the Blitz?
Oh, sorry, I do apologize. Yeah, there was the Blitz. There was that in the 40s. There was that in that hit London and Birmingham, Belfast, the munitions. I apologise. Yeah, it was there was the Blitz,
Yeah, and
but you mentioned
Sutton
Portsmouth.
Coldfield and quite a lot of the rest of, I mean, Bristol. Yeah, loads of us
Yeah, they hit
got
a
it.
lot of places. Bristol was hit, as you did say, but for that was a very very brief attack, and they stopped eventually. But yes, they could do it, but the thing is, if he's to do that, he wouldn't want to make Britain useless. I mean, he's got no intention of invading Britain. They've got enough problems in internal problems in Russia with Chechnya and maintaining the Donbass region. I can't see him doing that. But I don't know if you saw the interview with Tucker Carlson and Vladimir Putin, but in that interview, Putin, one of the first things he said was Johnson went out there to prolong war. So that means that Putin does have, I won't say altruistic principles, but he is. I don't think he wants trouble unnecessarily. I don't think anyone in charge of the War Office does. But for Keir Starmer to say that Davos is more important than Westminster, and for Keir Starmer to say that he doesn't know what a woman is when his mother had a uterus and fallopian tubes and was in I think the man's quite insane anyway, or just evil with it. And I think we've got people in charge now, or we will have people in charge that won't have any fear of
Well, no, well,
consequences
hang on a minute, because
whatsoever.
it's not just about Starmer, is it? Behind him is most definitely that little trio is Tony Blair. There's
Mm.
also a chap called Peter Mandelson, very
Oh, yeah,
powerful in the Labour Party these days, and also a guy called Alistair Campbell, who was behind the sexing up of the dodgy
yeah,
dossier, which led to the
yeah,
illegal war in Iraq. So, you know, it
yeah.
does worry me that maybe this is a war government that comes in with Starmer.
Yeah, well, I think so. From what Andrew Bridgen has said in that interview, that Sunak does not want to be the leader under a wartime leader. He just doesn't want it. He hasn't got the personality. But Starmer, if he wins, which he probably will, he's fresh from being leader of the opposition. He would. I just think he probably doesn't care. Or I mean, it's yet to be seen. I mean, again, it's very very easy to predict what's going to happen. But Andrew Bridgen has been right on. I've met Andrew, and he's been right on many other things. And I admire him from his sincerity when he told me that he's had the 2 jabs and he got ill, and I think I said, Andrew, you come from the biggest bunch of crooks in the universe, the Tory party. What happened? And for Andrew, I think it was just like 10 minutes before the hangman. He had nothing to lose by coming out because he thought in his own words, his head was going to explode and he would end up with a heart seizure. And I really hope that he survives and that he gets re-elected. But he's the only one really that we have in Westminster that is willing to tell us the truth. And to the old saying, to be forewarned is to be forearmed. That will do it. But to take us into war, I mean, it's just madness. It's just
Okay,
absolute
so
madness.
do you
Yeah,
see any light at the end of the tunnel?
light at the end of the tunnel. Well, I'd like to say I did. I think it's been broken a little bit, the World Economic Forum, but most people still don't understand the World Economic Forum. I mean, if you can compare what's happened over the last 4 years to a military attack equivalent, so we say, to the SAS going into the Iranian embassy. What do people do? Most people comply. This attack from the World Economic Forum in 2020 came out of nowhere. Most people didn't know how to respond. They're not trained soldiers. So what do? They just they collaborate. I mean, I don't apologize for using that word. They collaborate, they go along with it, and don't question it because they've never been under tyranny before. It was only the bravest of us that came out on the street that realized what was going. I mean, to give you an example, when the British Army were up against Washington's forces for 8.5 years, and that was, I think, July 1775 was the biggest attack on New York until 9/11. He took on the superpower of the day, the British Army, but it was only 3% of Americans that which, and America not even being a country at the time, that took on the British Army, the might of the British Army and the British Navy, and defeated after an 8.5 year war. So it can be done. I think it's more about quality of soldiers, quality of troops, and rather than quantity. And in that war, you had Thomas Paine, who went to America, and he disseminated his book. What was it? Not the Age of Reason, the Common Sense. amongst the American patriots and the Union Army, the Continental Army, to boost their morale. But I don't think we have any morale boosters whatsoever, because those in charge. What is unique about the last 4 years, Tony, is in the British Army, we were trained to deal with most adverse situations. Understanding psychology and psychiatry is about understanding how what human behavior happens to you in under adverse situations, under stress. But the British haven't been at war, and they're not prepared for war, and they would just comply with whatever goes on. They say that Starmer is a nice man. He's doing you'd have you'd say that old Putin kills babies and drinks their blood and all that. This would all come out in the press, and most British people will probably go along with it because they don't know any other way to respond. And the dangerous things about collaborators. I mean, I'm hearing of people dropping dead every now and then. I'm hearing people getting heart seizures. Recently, over the last 2 weeks, I've filled in not accident forms, what do you call it? The vaccine compensation scheme forms. It's quite a straightforward form, but I'm doing that more and more for people now that are realizing it was the vaccine that caused it. But I do digress. But well, the reason I say this is it's a unique situation that we're under siege. We're under attack from our own people, and it's to them that's inconceivable. But it is fact. We are under conceivable, and most people don't know how to respond with that situation. So they go along with it. And the dangerous thing about being a collaborator, as we've known over the last, from a moralistic point of view, and I bring the 4 years into this, those that are getting ill. I mean, recently there was a Tory MP, Craig McCockley, who's had a quadruple amputation on both his arms and legs. The arms and his feet turned necrotic, so they had, which means dead flesh, and so they amputated them. But despite that, he doesn't link this with the vaccine rollout at all. Anything but the vaccine rollout. And you've got to understand that mentality. The reason I say this is collaborators will take you with them to your grave, and they will not give a toss, Tony. Collaborators in many ways are more dangerous than the enemy, because collaborators are able to enforce the tyranny. Those that went along with it are basically enforcing the tyranny. They were willing to have vaccine passports. Fortunately, there was challenges from Big Brother Watch and one or two other organisations that stopped it, and we stopped it. The demo stopped it.
Well, I mean,
The
in
best form of
history, I mean, tyrants in history have always come to a sticky end eventually.
Yeah, that is true. I mean, even if you look at Oliver Cromwell, even though he was buried, I think, in Westminster Abbey, Charles the Third, was it, dug up his corpse and hung his corpse.
Charles the Second. Yeah, Charles the Third is our Charlie.
Sorry, yeah. In the 1640s, hung Cromwell, Charles II, for what he did to his father. So he didn't forget. So you are right, tyrants. I think long term they don't, but on a scale of 1 to 10, are they in any way more aware now, vigilant than they were 4 years ago? I look around and I still see people. I mean, come back from New York recently, a lot of people wearing masks out there, and they seem to be people that haven't learned much, or a lot of them. And the idea of going into war now would be another. It would be a histrionic situation, a hysteria situation where the symptoms get out of control, and but I don't think that Vladimir Putin has got any intention of invading the UK. I mean, it would be pointless, particularly if he bombed it, because it would be useless to them.
I think it's pretty clear that he's doing what
Yeah,
he's doing to protect
yeah,
the Russian people and the Russian state, quite rightly, at the
yeah,
moment.
indeed,
Anyway, look,
yeah.
Adam,
Yeah.
how can people follow you? Is there, if people are interested in seeing what you're up to,
Sure.
whereabouts can people follow your social media, that sort of thing?
Well, the main one I am on Twitter, but I don't really use Twitter too much. I really just do Facebook, Tony, and I've also got a YouTube channel which is SCO Fair, which is SCO space Fair, and I put videos, a number of different genres. I say I won a festival in New York Film Festival recently, so I do documentaries, etc., etc. But mainly on Facebook if people want to get in touch
Do you
with
want to
me.
just tell us a couple of names of your recent films?
Yeah, one of my recent film I had Times Square a week before last was called Spring in Chigwell, which is about a beautiful Essex village called Chigwell, which is famous for Charles Dickens' favourite pub, the King's Head, which was featured in Barnaby Rudge. But it's also famous for William Penn, the original founder of Pennsylvania, who went to Chigwell Boys' School. He was born in Walthamstow and buried in the Tower of London, but he went to Chigwell Boys' School, and so I called the film Spring in Chigwell. I put some music with it and poetry, a bit of ecology. And they asked me to submit it to the New York Film Festival, which is quite a big festival. We had a few famous people there. And because of its link with Pennsylvania, just over the Hudson River. So I thought so that's one of them. And I also had a film in the Hollywood Film Festival last year, International Hollywood Film for the Transcendent Nun, which is a bizarre comedy about a nun that keeps on appearing to me, trying to make me feel guilty. It's like a sort of very tongue-in-cheek comedy. It's on my YouTube channel. If you want to talk to yourself for half an hour, it's on there. But
Okay, Adam
yeah.
Scarborough, thanks very much for joining us.
Oh, you're welcome, mate. Anytime, Tony. Pleasure, pleasure.